stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When it comes to the money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
They gave me some ashes. I don't know if they were his ashes or not.
There's a difference between donation and body snatching.
We have to recognize that we can ban these weapons, but there's millions already out there. And somebody who decides to obtain one illegally probably can.
It simply is unacceptable for Congress to threaten economic calamity.
What we need is our system fixed,
Right.
not this Band-Aid solution.
The Biden administration had 2 years to prepare for this and did not do so.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President Biden will sit down with congressional leaders about the debt ceiling on Tuesday, just weeks before a possible default and after 203 mass shootings this year, and amid an immigration surge at the U.S.-Mexico border. As the leaders prepare to meet, Democrats and Republicans remain divided on all three issues. For more on this, Stephen Portnoy and Scott MacFarlane join us. Stephen is a CBS News radio White House correspondent. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Good to have both of you here for America Decides. Let's begin, though, by listening to some of the latest commentary on this debt ceiling standoff.
We've been waiting for months for the Republicans to articulate their position. They didn't produce a budget. What they did was produce a ransom note.
President Biden has to come to the table for a negotiated solution. He needs to listen to his economic advisors, not his political advisors, and take this very seriously, given the late stage that we're currently in.
I've been disappointed with the conversations up to date. Both parties are talking without listening to each other. They're just talking right past each other.
Mr. Portnoy, that was all of the Sunday sound, everybody taking their position. Now it's Monday. You're over at the White House. What is the White House's position as they go into this meeting?
Well, Bob, there is no change in the White House's position. In fact, we heard today from the press secretary that they shouldn't be viewed as a negotiation, but instead a conversation between the four leaders and the president. The president's position is that Congress has a constitutional responsibility to avoid default and pass, essentially, a clean debt ceiling increase, waiver, suspension, anything that avoids the calamity of a default as early as June 1st. The press secretary said today that the president is willing to have a separate conversation with the Congress on appropriations, on spending. But the fact that the House passed a bill that raises the debt ceiling in exchange for the budget cuts the president considers draconian means that they're at loggerheads. And so tomorrow there's going to be this meeting here at the White House with the top Republicans and Democrats from the House and Senate, the first such meeting of the big four of this Congress. But the positions of the White House are fairly clear and hard and fast, that the president at this moment going into these talks is not prepared to negotiate for an increase in the debt ceiling.
The president, Scott, says he's not prepared to negotiate. A conversation, though, in every sense, is the beginning of a negotiation. But on Capitol Hill, just how much political room does House Speaker Kevin McCarthy have to maneuver with his own members?
Generally speaking, no matter what the issue is, he has limited, finite room. He has a 4-vote margin, and he has a restive House Freedom Caucus, which can tug him to the right on certain issues. This moment in time isn't so much about negotiating space. It's about time and space. They have painted themselves into a corner. All players in this have. They have 3 weeks remaining. The fight now, according to one Senate Democrat speaking with CBS News, is find a way to invent some time on the calendar between now and June 1st. There are only a handful of days in which the Senate and House are actually in Washington, able to pass any legislation. They need more days here, functioning together between now and June 1st. Look for that priority to pop up this week. How do we make more legislative days? How do we spend more time here to make better use of these very limited 3 weeks?
So the debt limit certainly going to be top of the agenda when these congressional leaders meet with the president tomorrow. Stephen, but what about gun control? Here is what Senator Cassidy of Louisiana said to CBS this morning.
What you did is, if somebody has got a criminal background and they obtain whatever weapon it is, AR-15 or not, and they obtain it illegally, we attempt to go after the person who bought it for that criminal, who allowed that criminal to obtain it illegally. We have to recognize that we can ban these weapons, but there's millions already out there, and somebody who decides to obtain one illegally probably can.
Stephen, Senator Cassidy's position is a pretty general view of where a lot of members of the Senate Republican Conference stand on gun control. They don't want to really move anywhere because they don't see a lot of political space to do so. Will President Biden bring up gun legislation in any way on Tuesday, in addition to talking about the debt ceiling?
Well, there's no indication that he will at this point, but the press secretary here today called it a crisis. She said that Congress has a responsibility to act. Here at the White House today, the president had an event at midday that focused on the administration's steps to ensure that the airlines fairly compensate passengers when there are long delays or cancellations of flights caused by the airlines. That led to a series of questions. I was one of several reporters today who asked why, if the White House is calling gun safety a crisis, why isn't the president more engaged today? What's he doing about it today? And the press secretary said that this president has done more from an executive action standpoint than any president before him, more than 24 executive actions. And she says it's now incumbent on Congress to act. The president's position is well known. Aides here argue that he wants to ban the semi-automatic rifles known as assault weapons. He wants to ban high-capacity magazines. He's traveled to the scenes of mass shootings, and the president's position, aides argue, is well known, and now it's once again up to congressional leaders to take the ball. The president did last year sign a bipartisan gun safety bill, and that's another example of the president taking an action once it's sent to him by Congress. But the press secretary says there's not much more the president can do. In fact, the president himself has indicated that he believes his executive authority in this area is tapped out.
Tapped out, so what can Congress do? Scott, you have a better read than anyone on Capitol Hill. Is there anything on the table legislatively that could be a compromise on guns?
It's going to be a meeting Thursday. Senate Democrats are going to have one, and they publicized it because they want to be seen trying on this issue, even if they can't find a bipartisan branch from Republicans. There's nobody with a bipartisan bill getting traction, getting momentum. We look at the House Problem Solvers Caucus as people who've talked about background checks or other bridges over the gap together, but there's no momentum to this. In fact, as the day concluded here in Washington today, there's a Parkland family walking door to door trying to find meetings with members or staff, literally knocking on doors, trying to get Congress's attention. Quite a statement. They're doing that, trying to get attention, considering what happened over this past weekend and over this past year.
Stephen, I want to look at this new Washington Post ABC News poll that shows President Biden's approval rating. 36% approve, 56% disapprove. How is this new poll sitting inside the West Wing among your sources?
Well, I'm sure it's not sitting well. Look, that poll also indicated that a growing number of Americans believe that the president's age is a factor here, and a growing number of Americans believe that perhaps his mental acuity should be an issue. I don't think aides here are denying that this is a concern in the election, but I think they're focusing on what the president has done. They're talking about his agenda for the future. The whole idea here is that the president has accomplished things and that he wants to accomplish even more, and that he has, in his own words, he's talked about this recently in interviews and in a recent speech he gave when he was in Ireland, that because of his advanced age, he has wisdom. And that gives him, in his words, more experience than anybody else has. So that's the argument that the White House is prepared to make when questions come up about this issue.
Stephen Portnoy and Scott McFarland, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we hear about the culture war constantly, but how big of an impact does it actually have on American voters? We have brand new CBS News polling ahead. Plus, Donald Trump is racking up 2024 endorsements. But one former Trump administration official has made it his mission to help elect Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to the White House. Ken Cuccinelli joins us next. You're streaming America Decides.
Hey there. there. Welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way day to day. That first draft of history, it happens right here.
CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We go to stories because we can bring someone to that story. That human connection is incredibly important. The news doesn't have to be depressing.
What do you love about running? Energy! Energy!
It can be uplifting.
Welcome back to America Decides. You hear all about the culture war all the time on the political campaign trail, but do voters care? Here to answer that question is CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, good to have you here. Some Republicans have gone all in on the issue of banning books. How does that play politically?
Hey, Bob. The short answer is it's not very popular. It's not popular at all. Take a look at this. And this is overall among Americans. Should books ever be banned in schools for discussing race? 84% no. Criticizing U.S. history? 84% no. Depicting slavery? 85% no. And here's something you don't see every day. You actually get a lot of bipartisan agreement on that. It's pretty similar numbers between Republicans and Democrats. This is one of those things, Bob, where, yes, it might play or you might see it talked about a lot in a presidential primary, but with the general public, no, it's not popular.
Anthony, what about the issue of transgender matters? How is that affecting Americans? How are they thinking through that issue?
This is important to me because it might expose some breaks within the Republican Party that I think are important. Take a look at this particular issue. If a business was seen supporting LGBTQ people, what should your state do? Should it try to attract or punish that business? We've certainly seen that in the news. Or do neither. And I point to this. You get this 2/3 of Republicans who take what you might say is a more traditional conservative view, saying do neither, right? Hands off, don't get involved in business either way. But then take a look at, if you follow up and break that out by MAGA Republicans, those who see themselves as part of the MAGA movement, that number does jump up to almost 4 in 10 who would want their state government to then punish that business. So maybe a little difference there between that traditional conservative and maybe that more movement-oriented difference in the views of role of government among MAGA Republicans. That, I think, is something to keep an eye on as we talk about these so-called culture war issues going forward through the primaries, Bob.
Anthony Salvanto always keeping us up to date on the latest polling. Thank you. And while many of former President Donald Trump's political allies have stood by his 2024 candidacy, former Trump administration official Ken Cuccinelli launched the Never Back Down Super PAC, backing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis before DeSantis has even decided to jump into the race. Ken Cuccinelli joins us now. He previously served in the Trump administration as acting DHS Deputy Secretary. Ken, thank you for being here. We appreciate your time.
Good to be with you, Robert.
As you know, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, your political ally, he's not in the race yet, but he is facing some criticism already, not just from former President Donald Trump. Let's hear what former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie had to say in recent days.
And I believe as a conservative, the job of government is in the main to stay out of the business of business. Like, I don't think we should be heavily regulating business. I don't think we should be telling business what to do, what to say, how to think. And I believe that's what conservatives have believed for as long as I've been alive. I don't think Ron DeSantis is a conservative based on his actions towards Disney.
Ken, how's the Super PAC going to respond to that line of criticism?
Well, we've been responding. Nikki Haley's in there with Donald Trump and Chris Christie, and this is a clear difference between those in the field and potentially getting in the field for president. And Ron DeSantis, the reason we're called the Never Back Down PAC is because he never backs down. And this is round 3 with Disney going on right now. And they are truly unique in the country in having not only governance powers over themselves, but also over some of their competitors in the area there around Orlando. And that's being ratcheted back down to the level of every other business in Florida. And Ron DeSantis has made no apologies for that. And I can tell you, Robert, having been in not just the first 4 states, but some of the others as well, base, ordinary, regular Republican voters appreciate his position and his stick-to-itiveness and his willingness to not back down to these woke corporate bullies. And that's how they see Disney right now.
Ken, if the Florida governor gets in the race, will he actually take on former President Trump on policy, on other matters, or will it just be left up to the Super PAC?
Well, I don't actually know the answer to that because Super PACs, by their nature, follow.
But you know him. You know him, Ken.
They're supporting.
Do you expect him to take on Trump directly?
I don't expect anybody can get in a race for president and not expect to use a NASCAR analogy, to swap paint with the other folks in the race. And I fully expect that to happen. Really, the question is more to what degree. When the president has lobbed his name calling and some COVID criticism at Governor DeSantis, he has responded largely by ignoring the president's taunts and so forth and kind of just saying, pointing at the scoreboard, hey, look what I did. Look what we did in Florida. Look at how the freedom agenda played out here in Florida. It worked very well. And this is with everyone, in the expert world in Washington, including President Trump, trying to push him to lock down. He opened Florida back up, and Florida businesses survived and thrived. People moved to Florida for that. It's just one example of how he's differentiated himself based on performance. And he's done it consistent with conservative constitutional principles.
Ken, you're here on CBS News. We appreciate it. Later this week, former President Trump will have a town hall on another network. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, though, has largely avoided traditional news outlets. Do you believe that's a mistake?
So he has 4 of the largest media markets in the country there that have been up in his grill for 5 years. And I think he's done a pretty darn good job with the interactions with them. Again, another thing that Republican grassroots voters appreciate. I fully expect him to take essentially the same strategy nationwide. that automatically means you're engaging many, many, many more outlets, but it doesn't mean that he'll necessarily do it on their terms. He hasn't done it on the media's terms up to this point, and I don't think he's going to feel compelled to start changing what has worked well for the last 5 years.
Do you believe there'll be any cost for that politically, to just largely avoid doing sit-down interviews with traditional news outlets?
So I don't want to predict that he won't do any, but I think there's a cost and a benefit. Look, Robert, we on the right view most of the mainstream media as not independent or objective. They are out to support in one way or another, directly or indirectly, the left, in this case, the Democrat Party.
That's
and
not
so,
true.
Would you sit down? You can deny it all you want, but that's the right's view of the media, including judging by observation, the governors as well. Why would you sit down with your opponents and give them free shots? That, I think, is a lot of the mentality on the right. And until the media demonstrates that they're actually going to be objective, and demonstrably so, I think it's going to be a while for that perspective to change. And that's, frankly,
we appreciate his super PAC
that I
being
think
here
is a
on
very
CBS.
fair way of putting it.
Well, his super PAC leaders like yourself are able to chat with a traditional news outlet, which we appreciate. We'd welcome him anytime. He's been attacked relentlessly by the former president. Is there any chance he decides not to run? You know him well. I know you're not directly communicating with him, but do you think there's any chance he backs away from this race?
I've never seen anybody do all the things he's done up to now and not run. So, yes, it's possible, but I think that's very unlikely. And, of course, we're preparing for him to get in, hoping he'll get in, doing more on the ground than anybody has ever done this early. We knocked 1,000 doors in Iowa on Saturday, and we have staff in all of the first 4 states already working with the grassroots in those states. So we're building in the hopes he does get in, and there is a great deal of pent-up demand for the kind of performance and conservative principles that he brings to the fight. And, looking past the primary, Joe Biden, you were talking about the debt ceiling and his polling. America has a lot of legitimate questions about the president, and some people are pretty shocked he's even running for re-election. And my prediction, and I'll say it to you, Robert, is that I don't think if Ron DeSantis is the Republican nominee that Joe Biden will stand up and debate him. They'll find reasons not to debate him because I don't think that they believe themselves that he can go toe-to-toe with Governor DeSantis and his track record.
Ken Cuccinelli, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it. And there are good to be with you. And there are renewed calls for immigration reform in Washington, but can anything get passed? A look at why the issue is so politically charged for both parties when we come back. You are streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. The Border Patrol recorded an average of more than 8,000 daily migrant apprehensions over the past 3 days. That's according to agency chief Raul Ortiz. This amid concerns of a larger spike coming when Title 42, the pandemic-era border policy, ends on Thursday. For more, CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins us now. Major, Title 42. You've covered the White House. You've covered politics for years. How do you see this impasse, this crossroads?
So I was just in Arizona on Friday. I interviewed Katie Hobbs, the Democratic governor. She said the Biden administration is unprepared for the lifting of Title 42, even though it is the administration that is lifting Title 42. Said that she is working day in and day out to prepare for an onslaught of illegal crossers into Arizona, and that she's barely been in touch with either the president and not been in touch with the vice president at all about this. This is a Democratic governor, border state, someone that you would think the White House would be engaging with regularly. What do you need? What are your anxieties? What are you preparing for? Zero.
What are they preparing for? What do they expect in Arizona?
Governor Hobbs told me that they see the 1,500 troops going on an administrative capacity, essentially back up, handling paperwork in Texas. What did she tell me? She said, what does that mean? I've lived through this before as someone who served in the legislature in Arizona. When you fortify Texas, things move to Arizona and New Mexico. So they're anticipating a spillover effect as Title 42 is lifted. And they're preparing for that. Their tempo, she said, is every single day to be on the phone with everyone in their either county sheriff's departments, National Guard, or other mechanisms within Arizona to prepare for this. So it's a practical problem. It's a political problem. And this has been a political problem for the Biden White House almost since day one. Independents regard this question as you're changing, or you say you're changing Trump-era policies. What's the practical effect? More border crossing?
Help us understand that, though. We keep hearing Title 42 in the news. If you're not following this very closely, what is Title 42 and what's changing? What's the basic here?
Title 42, though you hear it a lot now in an immigration context, has nothing to do with immigration. It is a public health policy used by the Trump administration during COVID to say, hey, using this public health protocol, we can deny anyone entry on a public health basis. The Biden administration has essentially kept that. If you're trying to seek asylum or other ways of crossing the border through public health, we can say, no, you cannot come in. And that's the end of it. The lifting of that is reflective of a couple of things. The pandemic is over, not just as a means by how we're dealing with it at work and play and everything else, but the administration has said the pandemic emergency relief measures are over. So if you're lifting those, how can you keep this public health policy on the border? You can't. Not as a practical matter, and probably not as a legal matter. So it's being lifted. But how are you preparing for that? How are you helping those on the front lines deal with this? And when you hear a Democratic governor who wants more help from the Biden administration, saying, I need more help, and they're not there, they're not responsive, I think that is a very...
What do they want? More troops on the border? Do they want a wall? Do they want a new policy?
They, again, quoting the governor, what Katie Hobbs told me is, what I need is clearer lines of communication about why this is happening, what the administration has done in my state and elsewhere to prepare for it, and to provide me the resources for those who are probably going to be crossing the border. All those things. And that resources falls into a lot of different categories. It can be Border Patrol. It can be migrant facilities, temporary or otherwise. All of that is not there to her satisfaction. And when you hear a Democrat say that, you know that this is a problem for the Biden administration, not just in terms of politics. It's been a persistent one politically, but in the kind of thing the Biden administration says it's really good at. Preparation, execution, and follow-through. Not happening in Arizona.
A lot of ongoing discussions. Gun control, the debt limit, immigration. We'll leave it there. Major Garrett, really appreciate you stopping by. And we'll see you all tomorrow night when Major anchors this program. But that does it for today. You can stream us anytime, Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
An original